Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Talbot, Managing Director and Head of Research here at Red Cloud Securities, and I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on uranium today. We are going to hear from ALX Resources Management, including Warren Stanier. He's Chairman and CEO of the company. And during today's webinar, he will provide an overview and outlook, and then we'll take some questions. You can please type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we will get to as many as we can. But before we kick things off, first we need to discuss the fine print. During this ALX webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to the company's forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of its corporate presentation. And that can be found on the company's website, alxresources.com. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight this webinar is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note this call does not consider the particular needs or situation of individual investors, and participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. So please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on ALX resources. Now, before Warren steps up, I'd like to say a few words. Very positive news came out of the uranium sector a couple of weeks ago. Now, Sprott Physical Uranium Trust increased its base shelf to $3.5 billion. So what that means is after raising $1.3 billion this year, it now has the approvals, the necessary permission to nearly triple that amount. So we can expect the company to continue to add to its 40 million pounds worth of physical uranium, currently worth about $1.8 billion US. Now, we do view the fact that Sprott is raising further funds as good news, but we still await an increase in long-term contracting to support uranium prices on a sustainable basis. We certainly would love the uranium demand to be really driven by the end users. That's the nuclear utilities that use about 777 million pounds of uranium per year. But one cannot ignore the fact that physical buying has had an impact in pricing this year. The Sprott helped drive up prices from $30 to $40 starting in mid-August, and then its $1 billion raise since helped drive it up to the $46, $47 range. Now, we don't think Sprott's been too busy in the market lately, and as such, the uranium prices have slid back down to $43. But should they raise any of that $2.2 billion available, and we'd expect physical uranium purchases to be made, that could help propel prices up above $50 US per pound, and perhaps close to incentive prices needed by uranium developers and explorers in this industry. So with that, I want to now turn it over to Warren to update the audience on ALX.
Thank you, Dave. Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. I'm glad you covered off all that uranium market stuff because there's none of that in my presentation. So ALX Resources Corp is a uranium explorer. Also, we search for nickel and copper and anything else of value related to energy metals. I'm the chairman and CEO of ALX. And this is entitled New Technologies Lead to New Discoveries. That was a shot from one of our exploration programs a couple of years ago. Our forward-looking statements are pretty thorough. There's risks and uncertainties that are associated with mining exploration. And I encourage everyone to read these either in a replay on our website or in our MD&A. So who we are, ALX. We are the result of the business combination of Lakeland Resources, Inc. and Alpha Exploration, Inc. in 2015. Alpha Exploration was a spinout from the takeover of Alpha Minerals by Fission Uranium, and that was because of the Patterson Lake uranium discovery in 2012. It's now known as RRR. So we explore for mineral properties in Canada for uranium, energy metals, and gold. Shares outstanding, stock options, warrants, fully diluted, 310 million shares. Our working capital right now is 4.2 million. And there's our 52-week trading range. So again, who we are, I started in this business, I guess at the bottom, practically picking up the mail. Well, I did pick up the mail. I worked with Pioneer Metals. Pioneer Metals was a gold explorer It eventually created UX Corporation in 2002. For the first year or so, we sat around wondering why we had done that, because nobody wanted to talk to us about uranium ever. But then in late 2003, the spot price of uranium started to rise. And in 2004, we made discoveries, and it got very exciting for the next couple of years. All in all, I had been with that group for 12 years when I left in 2007. During that time, Pioneer was taken out by Barrick. That was a great thing. Northern Continental asked me to join them, so I did. They had properties near the Key Lake Mine Road that goes to McArthur River that became important, and we were taken out by Hathor, which was then eventually taken out, as everyone probably knows, by Rio Tinto. But it was Alpha Minerals where we made a discovery that was ESO uranium, became Alpha. That was an exciting time as well. And then, of course, here we are at ALX today. So I want to tell you about our team. I can't say enough about them. It's a superb group of professionals. And it really, I encourage you to look at our website, because I had to edit these down quite a bit to make them fit on a single page. Seard Eriks, very experienced uranium geologist, also worked in gold. You can see all his credits here. He's been involved in the outlining of uranium deposits. And that is a lot of work. That's hole after hole after hole. You have to be a very organized and efficient person to do that work. And that's what Seard is good at. Jody DeRouge is an excellent director to have on the board, another geologist. He has a geological consulting company. He's worked on many deposits. His company works worldwide, as far as I know. But what I like is that Jody's people are available to help ALX when we need people on the ground. And Jody's been involved in properties where significant discoveries were made in the future after his time at Fission Energy, including the J Zone at Waterbury Lake and Triple R with Patterson Lake South. David Miller, another very experienced uranium geologist, lives in the United States and was the CEO of Strathmore Minerals before its merger with Energy Fuels in 2013. David knows a lot about Canadian uranium and a lot about American uranium. He's a very, very intelligent man, and he's a pleasure to have on the board. Jean-Jacques Gautreau of Paris, France. Well, the first line, former chairman of the World Nuclear Association. This man knows everything about the nuclear markets, about fuel, about supply and demand. And on our behalf, he has attended really strategic conferences in Europe, because Europeans have it easy. They just get on a train and they're in Madrid. So it's nice to have Jean-Jacques on the board. It's a pleasure to work with him as well. And he was working with Orano, with what has become Orano, for years. Howard Hogum is a PhD in economics and business. He's a very astute person, a business person, and another great addition to our board. And without the front office people, our administrative people, it would be hard to run this company. Mr. Patrick Graining, CFO. He's had roles with public companies such as Strathmore and Fission Energy. So there's a lot in the family here. And Pat's just a very thorough and dedicated professional. Now, I also should mention we have Christina Body as corporate secretary and Roger Leschuk as our communications manager. Again, very important parts of our front office team. On our technical side, I think we have an unparalleled technical committee. Charles Roy worked with Cameco for 33 years. He's seen every deposit that Cameco has ever worked on. He directed exploration. He managed programs. He saw worldwide uranium. And especially towards the end of his career with Cameco, the Millennium uranium deposit he was directly involved in. Dave Quirt, when I first started in this business, I knew nothing about uranium, but Dave told me a lot. He was working at SRC as a research scientist, also with Alistair McCready, who was one of the discoverers of Rough Rider. So the two of them were very important in our business, in that all the material that came for analysis, they saw, they studied, they gave us opinions. Dave eventually ended up at Orano, which was at the time Areva, the French uranium company, senior geoscientist, and now he's a professor at the University of Manitoba. And Dave's a great addition to our technical team. Ken Wozliak, I will speak of Ken a little bit later, and something important that he did. He's an expert on clay mineralogy, as is Dave Court, but in particular, Ken works with the geochemical techniques of clay mineral spectroscopy. And these are the minerals that tell you if you're close to a uranium deposit or not. And he has a proprietary program. Very happy to have him on the board. For our nickel and base metals project, we have Dr. Larry Hulbert. Larry knows more about nickel than anybody I know. He worked with the GSC. There's numerous awards that he's received, and we could have a full page on Larry. It's just that there wasn't quite enough room in the presentation, but Larry is someone that has really helped us a lot with the Firebird nickel and now Electra nickel. So our projects in Canada, Saskatchewan, that's where our roots are as a company. And at one time, ALX was a pure uranium company. I think you can see my cursor. This is the area of the Athabasca Basin that we'll be talking about. All of these stars are just showing various projects that we have. And Firebird nickel is on the other side of the sandstone. And we have another property up there as well. And we have some gold properties. Ontario, we have 3 projects, one of which is subject of a potential sale in the future. But Electra nickel, we have and that's Vixen Gold. Electra nickel, we have a drilling program planned for 2022, and we've just done some work at Cannon Copper, a former mine, in 2021. But Saskatchewan, that's where most of our team has worked primarily. Has produced, we're honing in on 1 billion pounds of uranium. I added together all the numbers that I had, and I got 900 million a couple of years ago. So we'll just say over 900 million pounds of U3O8 since 1975. A gold mine that won't quit, the CB Santoy operation. It's now owned by SSR Mining. They happen to be our new neighbors on one of our properties. They just bought Taiga Gold. And base metals, well, Flin Flon and Creighton, right at the border, have been producing for 90 years plus. So there's just a huge, huge legacy of mining in Saskatchewan. Now, this will be a little bit hard to see. It looks busy, I'm sure. Here's Saskatchewan. There's the basin at the top. So here we are. And just we'll go clockwise. Gibbs Creek uranium, Black Lake, Sabre. These are 3 of our uranium projects on the northern rim of the basin. Our nickel projects just above there, there's Firebird Nickel, Flying V, and there's a gold project called Hummingbird as well. Some of these projects, you look at this and go, that's a lot of projects. And that's why, like a game of Monopoly, you buy, sell, and trade. And we are currently selling some of these projects to an Australian company, Okapi Ventures, Newnham Lake, Perch, Lazy Edward Bay, Argo, Kellick Lake, and Clough Lake. Those are all properties that are in a package that we are currently in the sale process for. It's in the due diligence period right now. So yeah, like in Monopoly, you grab the land that you can because you might want to build a hotel there someday. So here's all the major mines that have been found, and also the Clough Lake mine. We all know the names: Cigar Lake, MacArthur River, Eagle Point, Rabbit Lake. This is where we came from. So we'll just move ahead to the history of where we came from. And I just wanted to show you this slide of the Athabasca Basin because this is a very important drill hole. The Rumpel Lake drill hole, drilled in 1979, I believe, 1,455 meters. If we were to drill that today, and considering it's in a remote area, it's going to be at least $500,000. Could be $1 million drill hole. So these next few slides will show why people don't really drill like that anymore. Well, that was actually more of a technical hole anyway. So the evolution of exploration in the basin, when the American oil companies all got uranium subsidiaries and came in here. They were treating the Athabasca sandstone like it was American deposits. So they drilled into the sandstone, and this is an example of what happened at Midwest in 1970. Had they continued this hole, the second hole of the program, just a little bit further, about 40 meters or so, they would have caught the toe of the deposit. But instead, there was much consternation in the head office, and who knows if somebody lost their job, but it was 8 years before they actually found the Midwest uranium deposit, after this model didn't work. So we then adopted the unconformity deposit model, and it was found at Key Lake that there was graphite associated with uranium, so graphite became a very important thing to look for. Look for conductors, look for these faults with the conductors where the uranium would come out of solution and these hot fluids would create a deposit. So there we have Cigar Lake, MacArthur River, of course, Midwest. So this was the model that we looked at. But then in 2000 or so, very late 1990s, the German company Uranics was working at Millennium. When Cameco bought Uranics, they looked at the core and they said, look at all this alteration. This is something's going on here. So, and they soon found a deposit that was below the unconformity. So that led to people at Cameco at Eagle Point looking deeper and deeper along these graphitic fault zones. Arrow then is an example of this kind of deposit that NextGen discovered. So here's our 1990s drill holes looking for something along the unconformity that would all have failed. And so here's our hypothetical model for the future, never to be overlooked, that there could be something below the unconformity. So the chase, how do you get the ground? Well, in the old days, you had to stake it by hand. So here we have the Athabasca Basin, 2005. And what I did is I put a little, this is the uranium spot price chart right here in the corner. These tiny little marks are $20 increments. So here we have 2005. There's been a discovery at Black Lake that UX made in 2004. There's been a discovery at Kiana, at Shea Creek by UX as well in 2005. So that was a really exciting time for me being involved in all of that. And the basin started to fill up. More and more people were attracted to uranium. But the price was only $20 a pound. So let's go to the next year, 2006. Wow. Now remember that drill hole, it was 1,400 meters. Everyone's staying away from there. Okay, that's good. But they're still getting into deep territory, very expensive, very deep. This is where the mines are. This is now an area that we keep our eye on for the future because that'll be coming up in a little while. It was overlooked at this time, but this is how these models work. You learn from someone's discovery and you implement it into the next model. Oh, the price, of course, was $30 a pound, but this is when everything went really crazy. 2007. So UX, when I was saying that we wondered why we ever did it, those were just low periods in the day, I guess, maybe after lunch. But the price started to rise and rise and rise and rise. And so did our share price. At one point in 2003, it was down to 8 cents. But when I left in this year, it was at $8 or just under and went to $9. So a lot of people made money from this boom, especially in this couple of years, 2006, 2007. So we now, I'm going to fast forward. Oh, and of course, there's the share price, $138, or the spot price of uranium, pardon me. 2020, fast forward, we've had Fukushima, we've had a downturn in the market. It just got pretty threadbare. There's still some claims here. Some of these, there's a little gray areas that are actually claims where people didn't pay to be on the map. So those are the kind of years it was, 2019 and into 2020. Here's that area that I pointed to earlier. It's empty. There's ALX, gamely keeping its claims, and there are some reasons why we were able to keep those claims, and one was COVID itself, that there were extensions given by the Saskatchewan government. Because if you don't work on this ground and you don't file that work or pay the government cash, you will lose it. So here we are after a staking rush that occurred just in the last 4 months. Now that area that I was pointing to earlier, it's completely filled in. There's been discoveries by baseload, by 92 Energy in this area. So new models are evolving. This was an area that probably had sandstone cover. It's all eroded away. So maybe it's the basement model that's just sitting there, or deep enough that nobody could walk over it and know it was there. So here we are today, and the spot price has come down to, well, it's obviously been rising. At this point in time, it was about $48. We're just under $45 today. So that has certainly helped the investment into uranium and in what we do. So now you got the ground. So what do you do with it? So what I call the hunt is going to be the Patterson Lake South deposit discovery. So this is on the south side of the basin. Cluff Lake is up here. This is a highway. So literally people from Orano have told me, yeah, we used to drive by there all the time to sort of look, you know, what's going on over there? Nothing. Because there wasn't much going on. There had been all this electromagnetic work. So where do you drill? The conductors are everywhere. How do you pick? How do you choose? If there's nothing on surface that anybody could really find, because people had combed this area with scintillometers looking for radioactive boulders, like what had been done at Midwest and MacArthur River. So the joint venture of Fission Energy and ESO Uranium decided to hire a company called SPI, Special Projects Inc. And they used this little Cessna to fly very low over the terrain. There's no tall trees in this area. There's no mountains. So you can do it. And what they did is they outlined radioactive zones or spots. So this is kind of just the contour, the outline of where all these radioactive spots were. And we'll go back to this slide in a minute. Because other people couldn't find them because they were buried. And here's an example of a pit. I took this picture in 2013 when I visited Patterson Lake. These are the boulders that came out of a pit like that, up to 40% uranium. The irony of that is when we found them in 2011 and dug these up by using the GPS coordinates of all these radiometric hits, still didn't do anything for our share price because uranium was just at a low and no one was really that interested. But yeah, let's go back because I want to show you, this is where the discovery area eventually occurred. This is the glacial direction. So the glaciers drag material probably out of the lake itself and distribute it, and usually in some kind of a fan. So that's why we have this irregular shape of where these boulders were found. But this is the discovery zone right here, R00E. We're going to see that in a minute. So the joint venture began drilling. They had radon that they had done on the ground. They had conductors. They didn't know which ones were fertile. On the 16th hole, this is PLS 2012, number 16, at about 100, there we are, 180 meters. There was a little bit of uranium, a couple of hundred parts per million in a couple of places. But when Ken Wozniak did the spectroscopic work on this core, he told the JV, you've got pseudoite. Pseudoite is a clay alteration mineral. Or it's an alteration mineral that's often found very close to a uranium deposit. So there was pseudoite. So he said, you need to drill closer to that hole 16. So the joint venture did that. Hole 22 is 9 meters away. Suddenly we have a mineralized zone, 8.5 meters of 1.1%. So, and here it is right here. So this deeper area didn't have the mineralization. It was just literally below the overburden. It was very close to surface, 66 to 70 meters or so. So now what? Now it's winter. That was November 3rd, 2012. let's go out in the lake and drill. How are we going to find a spot in the lake to drill? So the joint venture developed a system, a new method, a modern method of doing radon in winter in a frozen lake. And it came out of this book, the idea. Radonex and the team of Garrett Ainsworth, Ray Ashley, figured out a method where they could do lake sediment radon and radon in water. And this was the result. So now we're early into 2013. The lake is frozen. Where do we drill? Well, look at this blob of radon right here. And it was at 390 meters from hole 22. There's not many uranium exploration projects that have had a step out that far that was successful. And so there was probably a couple of holes drilled in between, I'm sure. This is hole number 38. But when we drilled that, 34 meters of almost 5% uranium. And here's a picture from some of the drill core. It's pinning that scintillometer at 10,000 CPS, 9999. Those are the numbers we want to see. Now we have scints that read higher. So that was then. And here's what the deposit became. So this was the area of hole 22. This was the area of hole 38, and thousands of meters of drilling. And what you have, the latest number I can find is 81 million pounds a reserve, which is the best number at 1.61%. And the indicated and inferred from earlier in this year of 2019 were a little bit higher, but chances are they'll find more. They usually do. This is from a technical report that was published, this picture published in 2015. So let's look at our projects. How do we follow a method like that? How do you follow a sequence like that? Well, first of all, we know that Gibbs Creek up in the northeastern basin has radioactive boulders on surface. It also has conductors, and there's many conductors in this area, and people followed them. Lakeland drilled a hole, our predecessor company, the boulders are up to 4%. This was 0.13% in a drill hole over a quarter of a meter or so. So there's some fertility there below the surface. And in this maglow, this was seen, and this is where we advance using more technology, better technology. 2005, this conductor we call the Zinger conductor now was first seen. And then in 2017, here over at Black Lake, we have a very long and pronounced electromagnetic conductor that has uranium in it. And this is the discovery area from 2004. This makes our magnetic low with a conductor pretty attractive. If you can find uranium here, then maybe we can find uranium there. So where do we drill on a conductor like that? The Z10 showed it better definition in 2017. So what we did, here's the Z10, the axis of the conductor. We did a grid across this conductor with what is called SGH. Now SGH is a proprietary soil survey. And let me just read you something from, I wouldn't be able to memorize this. SGH research since 1996 has shown that surficial material absorbs hydrocarbon compounds released from the decomposition of bacteria and microbes that have fed on a mineral target at depth. Well, the first time I heard that a few years ago, I thought it was completely crazy, but Great Bear Minerals announced in 2019 that they had been using SGH and finding new gold zones on their Dixie project. So started looking into it and realized, hey, maybe this would work. And for uranium, when you're drilling 200 to 300 meters down or more, trying to find an economic deposit, why not drill where something on surface is telling you that this is a pretty good area to start? So we did a survey in October. This fault is running through the conductor. It breaks the conductor in some way. And lo and behold, we got 2 anomalies from the SGH on that conductor in that October 2021 survey. So this is what we're going to concentrate on in a drilling program in 2022. A little bit about our nickel. We started this in 2019. All this ground had been held for many years by Pure Nickel. They abandoned the property. It took 10 years for all the claims to lapse. And we consolidated this project. We bought from 3 other people. There's the monopoly game again: buy, sell, trade, and we staked some ourselves. So that staking rush started because this company, Kobold, I call it the Billionaires Club because apparently Bill Gates is an investor in Jeff Bezos. And we had already had Flying V up here, a nickel showing at Reeve Lake. But all of a sudden, these people on a Sunday night staked 70,000 hectares. So what are you going to do? There's the opportunity knocking again. So we staked more on Flying V. And when all this came up with deposits inside what's now the Firebird property, there's 3 deposits there have been found, none of them economic. But what does that tell you? It tells you that something's going on. And eventually Rio Tinto saw that, and they've done a deal with us where they can earn up to 80%. There's a similarity in the style of the mineralization that's been noted by the Saskatchewan government, by Charles Normand. This is a rock that we pulled out of Firebird, 3.13% nickel out of an old trench. The high-grade nickel is in the vicinity. The question is, how do you find it? So we did drill. We used SGH, and we did drill on the property in 2020. This was a hole that we drilled based on the results of a borehole survey where we missed the first target. There was the second target just to the side. This is where the technology helps you. How many times have people walked away from one drill hole, didn't do the downhole EM, and then, okay, well, there's nothing here. Well, there was. So almost 24 meters of 0.36% nickel, including over 10 meters of over 0.5% nickel and 2 meters of almost 1% nickel. Again, we know that the area is fertile. So we applied, we did a brand new V10 survey over what's now Firebird. Rio Tinto financed all of that. We drilled 4 holes on targets, 2 in 1 position here. We were not lucky enough to find economic nickel in those holes, but I'm hoping that they will continue on the project in 2022 or a subsequent year and move closer to these areas where we drilled in the past and found nickel below surface. Alligator Lake Gold, this came up because of an ad that I read in one of the newsletters, and someone was marketing this project. Turns out I knew the geologist, Dan Jurika, fairly well. And it's been held for a long time. There was high-grade gold found on surface. We went to the property. We found over 500 grams in a grab sample. I mean, it's hard to say no. So we did a deal with the company. We did a first pass drilling program in 2021. A driller was available. It was all serendipity because there's a road nearby, which is a great thing. The driller was available. We managed to get 6 holes done, and we got gold mineralization in every hole. This is what caused some excitement in the marketplace when we announced we had found visible gold. It didn't translate into huge grades, but we still know that there's high grade there. There's a meter of 10 grams. There's 0.7 of a meter of 16 grams within these intersections. And they're quite shallow, as you can see. This is just below the surface. So it's an exciting project. We've now just flown it with the SPI low-level, high-resolution mag. I wanted to show you the difference between the government mag that we all get for nothing, and this is what we see. And we see these blobby, coarse, magnetic lows and highs. But then when you fly it at 50-meter spacing, low, with that equipment, this is what you get. And this is where you can see structures that might make a big difference. Understanding them, putting our drill holes into creating this matrix and seeing where we should be going next. And also, we went there in October to check out a couple of historical showings. We found this, we went to a copper showing, 1982, 0.5% copper. No one's ever been there since, except for us. And this was the rock that we pulled out of the showing. So the geologists like it. We'll see what it comes back from the lab and what it tells us. But there could be more potential on this property than just for gold. There could be VMS potential. Ontario, Vixen Gold, as I mentioned, is the subject of an option agreement with First Mining Gold Corp. So they could purchase it outright. It would be just under $2 million. It became kind of unwieldy for this project. First Mining has a camp in that area. We don't. It's called Spring Pole. It's a 4 million ounce gold deposit. So it's their major gold asset. And this complements it. So we'll be a shareholder of them. Electronickel, we have drilling plan. We'll show you that in a moment. Cannon Copper is an old copper mine from the 1960s that was apparently mishandled and went into dormancy. So here's Electra. Thunder Bay is just down the road here from Kakabeka Falls. We're about 35 kilometers. This is the Trans-Canada Highway. I mean, it doesn't get much closer than that. There's roads, forestry roads going into the property. But the best part is Inco's mine that ran, I think, from 1972 to 1996 with a couple of stops in between. But they mined and milled millions of pounds of nickel and copper and cobalt and PGEs from that deposit. So what we see is a certain gravity trend that goes through the property that Larry Hulbert has identified. We have drill targets based on these areas of the property where there's komatiites, which is a known host for nickel. This is the prospector Russell Kwiatkowski from Thunder Bay that first called me. And talk about opportunity. I got the call and I sent him an email. Russell, you know, we're just kind of full up with projects. I sent this picture to Larry after that phone call. Larry said, you don't see those textures, those Spinifex textures everywhere in the world. You need to get this property. So I called Russell back. I said, Russell, forget what I said. So we optioned the property. We flew it with V10. These are the flight lines. These are the conductive zones that have never been seen by explorers before because they're too deep. Well, they're deeper than 100 meters or so. And that's where you find big deposits these days because all the planes that flew in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, they just did not have the depth penetration. Sometimes they would get a sniff of it, but that was it. So Cannon Copper, we've flown with, these are just the claims. There's a former Cannon Copper mine along this fault that seems to be a very fault bound and an interesting property, but we really haven't had much of a chance to look at it. But with copper at 425 or 30 or whatever it is US, it's something that we shouldn't have ignored. And it was sitting in our inventory of properties from the Lakeland and Alpha business combination. So what's up for us in 2022? Gibbs Creek, we have a fertile, what appears to be a potentially fertile area that we want to drill. When you already have, in the past, they would have drilled it for the conductor alone once it was known, or for the cross-cutting fault that goes through the conductor. But we have that geochemistry that's providing another hint of what might be there. Electronickel, we have a drill permit in application. It was filed in November, so we hope to be drilling in February or potentially March, following engagement with the local First Nation. Alligator Lake, we have a permit. It's could be sooner than later. We don't know when we'll be going in there exactly, but drillers contracted, and we're developing targets based on that magnetic survey. And with Firebird Nickel, there's follow-up drilling recommended by Rio Tinto. It's a big company, and we're awaiting for their decision for what to do in 2022. And this was our setup for one of the drill holes in 2020 when we drilled it on our own. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Warren. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So we're now going to kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. So a reminder to everyone that's on the line, please type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. So Warren, we already have a few questions here, but you are right. Things sort of went crazy in 2007, exactly when I started to cover the sector. And I certainly implore you, don't drill a 1,400 meter drill hole.
We're not doing that.
So yeah, good. So I did enjoy your history of the exploration through the basin, going from sandstone hosted to graphitic shears at the unconformity to basement hosted. I'd say most companies, with few exceptions, are looking into the basement. Am I assuming that ALX will largely be seeking these basement hosted deposits?
We have been, and we do. I mean, we're not afraid. At Newnham Lake, we drilled over 300 meters into the basement, and we still saw alteration 300 meters from below the unconformity. But you just have to get that right spot where there's something, some feature, some fault, some breccia, whatever, that allowed fluids to move and bring uranium. It'll bring other things. You look for boron, you look for all kinds of other alteration products like the pseudoite. And we found pseudoite in certain holes, in certain places. So the next thing is just fine tuning your targets.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Those alpha mineral days around discovery of Triple R were pretty exciting times as well. I know I rode on that boulder field a few times before the discovery. So, ALX essentially was founded on uranium. It was spun out and then the merger. Are you guys back to focus on uranium right now? And how much attention might you give nickel, cobalt, gold? And is your treasury large enough to ensure that each project gets its deserved amount of attention?
Well, that's a good question. The Treasury, I mean, yes, we have $4 million now, but we want to work on projects that are the most expedient and cost-efficient ones to drill. So that's Gibbs Creek. There's an all-weather road right to Stony Rapids. There's an airport. We can get in and out of there cheaper than anywhere else. Bring parts up quickly. Delays should be minimal. We're engaging with First Nations. That's always, something that you have to go carefully on and make sure that everyone's happy with what you're doing. This is an area that is not part of it's not part of a hunting ground. There's no caribou or things like that, but we're still going through that process. However, as I said, access is everything, and so Electra is the same. We've got roads into the property. There's no drill holes in any of the areas where we are, but there's roads. So we think that we can test these properties for $500,000 to $750,000 each. It's not like you're spending $2 million on one project.
Right. You look for the discovery, and that's when the real money really starts to.
Well, that's it. You have to get something that's good enough. Look what happened at Firebird. We drilled in 2020. We found nickel, magmatic nickel sulfide. That attracted Rio Tinto. That's their whole business, is looking for deposits like that. So they're willing to spend up to $12 million to earn 80%. So we're at about, we're less than 3 million right now, but we're just really starting that process.
Sounds good. So you've mentioned buy, sell, trade. Would you guys consider yourself a project generator? Is your goal to find something or make a project look attractive and then spin it off, or is there anything you'd really like to explore and develop yourself?
You don't know that until it happens. That's the thing. Sometimes people approach you. We were approached on the 6 properties with Okapi, so they wanted to buy some uranium properties. So, well, which ones would we be willing to sell? So that's how it starts. It's just the interplay between companies, whether it's a major that says, hey, we really like your nickel project and we want to buy a majority interest over time. I mean, how do you say no to that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And so when somebody approaches you looking for a project, how do you go about trying to decide whether or not they're worthy of taking a project? Do they need exploration experience? Are you looking for cash, shares, spending on the ground? How do you go about that?
It's a combination of all three. It's kind of like that chess game that Spock used to play, of different levels. And so the number of expenditures, well, with Rio Tinto, it was lighter on cash, but heavy on expenditures. With other people, there's no shares. Other people offer you shares, like First Mining. It's $1 million of cash, just about, and $1 million of shares if they go all the way to 100%. So it's always a little bit different. I didn't put the word project generator into the presentation because, in a sense, we are, but what if we hit something really good that we own 100% of and we can raise money for? That's the whole point, is what can you raise money for? What happens to the commodities? So they rise, they fall, then what do you do? And so the deep pockets companies, like the majors, that's where they have traditionally stepped in, is in lean times. They're the ones that can finance you, but they take their pound of flesh, so to speak.
Yeah, I always tell people that when you're investing in juniors, you want a breadbasket of juniors. You never know where the discovery is coming. Even inside your company, you want a pipeline of projects. You never know where the discovery is going to come from.
That's exactly right. And I know some people in the banking, like yourself, who have always said the same thing. It's always the project you least expect or something. So with Gibbs Creek, we haven't really done any work there for years. We flew it in 2017. It was drilled last in 2015 with some modest success. I think those numbers right now, if that hole was drilled with 1,300 parts per million or 1,000 parts per million uranium, that's a pretty good number. That would get everyone pretty excited. But it just sat there all this time, so we didn't let go of it. That's the one thing I can say is our company has managed to hang on in the lean times when we didn't have a lot of money, and we got these extensions from the COVID extensions of up to 2 years. So it created a big inventory of properties. But
yeah. Okay. And your inventory of properties has a heavy Saskatchewan focus.
Absolutely.
Projects notwithstanding, would you consider expanding outside of Saskatchewan a little bit more, perhaps in other uranium jurisdictions or nickel jurisdictions?
One thing I learned is never say no for no good reason. If somebody calls you and says, "Hey, I got something I want you to look at, would you be interested in it?" And just take a look at it. And there's American uranium we're looking at. I mean, whether I don't know if we'll do it, because American uranium it's a different ball of wax. You have to pay the government every year. There's no assessment work. It's a different kind of a story. But we have David Miller there, our director. He knows everything about it. So we could pivot into American uranium. It's possible.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd say there's a gap in uranium focused companies and exploration. I'd say most of the companies in the U.S. tend to be developers as opposed to explorers. So,
part of it is you don't have the same system of assessment reporting that like we have. We do the research. We combine that with new technologies, because here's all these people that did all this earnest work in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and they didn't find what they were looking for. But we see traces, hints. We look at old Corp. We examine it with Ken Wozniak's tools, and et cetera. And but in the U.S. there's none of that. It's bankers boxes in someone's garage. That's all the data. That's where the data is. Yeah. Unless it's Newmont or someone like that, then they're the organized ones. So it's harder to assess things.
Yeah. You mentioned David Miller. He was one of the first guys that helped me cut my teeth in this industry. I've had a lot of opportunity to deal with a lot of your team over the last couple of decades. Yeah. You seem to have that technical team in place, which isn't always hard or easy for small companies. Do you still have any gaps in your team, or are you really more concerned about logistics? Securing diamond drills and eventually assay lab turnover, things like that.
Well, definitely with people, there will be attrition. People will leave. We need people coming in. There's always these things happening. And so, yeah, we're very conscious of keeping the team strong. And if someone is leaving, that to bring someone else in.
Okay. And when finding a uranium deposit, you talked about searching for radioactive boulders. So should I read into this that you're going to be looking outside the basin proper in places where there are no sandstone cover on many of your projects?
Yeah, I actually didn't get to that. I mean, there was so much to cover and I didn't want to take too long. But Mackenzie Lake, Javelin, when we staked those, we've already flown those with the low-level radiometric and magnetic system in that little Cessna. So we did that in October. We just haven't really talked about it. And we don't even have the data yet processed and available to look at. But we have sent people onto the ground, and we've got some rocks in the lab too from those properties.
Right. Okay. And since I have you here, maybe a learning moment. Many explorers talk about drilling conductors, but it's not the uranium that's conductive. Can you maybe tell viewers what you're actually trying to test for when you're drilling a conductor?
When we drill a conductor, it's really for the graphite, which is I guess it's the redox front, and I'm not a geochemist or a geologist, but it's the graphite that helps pull the uranium out of solution when it finally arrives in that spot. So because graphite's conductive, and you can see it with an electromagnetic survey, then that tells you, okay, there might be uranium here. But I mean, all the people on our technical team can talk about the thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of meters that they drilled and found graphite.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I've always looked for something that's a little bit different. What could give you the scent of uranium over something that you know to be graphitic because somebody else drilled it or you drilled it? But that graphite is always the first key now. And generally when you have hundreds of meters or 100 or how many meters of sandstone cover, you're looking for graphite in the basement. And it's not always the best conductor. The most brilliant ones, the hottest conductors, could be the ones where no fluids have ever attacked the graphite. It's the ones that might be weaker where a deposit may be.
Yeah. And then some of these basement hosted deposits like Rough Rider even threw us a loop and that was off conductor. Right. So yeah.
There's that too. So
yeah.
But somehow there was exposure potentially to that graphite, which helped the formation of the deposit. Every deposit is different, and we try and sort of put the square pegs into the round hole and say it fits this model or that model. But, you know, look what's happened with baseload and 92 Energy. When I see the drill core, it reminds me of Raven Horseshoe, which is further to the north. And that's when I was in UX and we were re-drilling those deposits. It looks the same. It's very hematized. Maybe there's not as much graphite. I haven't really seen that. But then hematite iron itself can be a reductant too, because at the Fond du Lac deposit, which is near our Sabre property, it's just a few miles to the west. There's no graphite, but there's uranium, and there's lots of hematite and iron. So there you go.
Yeah, and all of these conductors tend to be along the major structures as well. So
and the sympathetic
in, drop uranium out.
That's right. So, and the major structures sometimes, I've been told by our consultants, they're almost there's too much of a flushing action on the main one. It's the sympathetic one, the one that's a few hundred meters away that's parallel to it. That could be the one where the uranium is. And that's what we have at the Black Lake project. We've got the Black Lake fault, which runs all the way through the basin for I don't know how many hundreds of kilometers, all the way down to Centennial, where there is uranium there. They call it the Virgin River Shear Zone. But the Black Lake project is on the Platte Creek Shear Zone, which is parallel to Black Lake fault. So just a couple of kilometers over. And that's why I like the Zinger conductor and where we are at Gibbs Creek, because these things tend to be, there's echelons to these things.
Right. Okay. We're approaching top of the hour, so maybe three more questions here.
Sure.
You mentioned Gibbs Creek, the SGH geochemistry that you're using there. Not common in the sector, and that could be a sort of a good thing. You know, are these anomalies are showing up on surface, but how deep do you think they can see? And are these surveys expensive or time consuming?
We'll start from the last part of the question. They're not that expensive. And because I didn't get into this, again, time constraints, but you only need to take a fist-sized clump of near surface dirt. So you can move quickly. You don't have to dig a big hole that takes an hour to dig, or you go through the A horizon, the B horizon, down to the C horizon. This is A horizon. They used to recommend B, so you're down about a foot or so, or depending on where you are. But now they're saying, just take the A horizon. So it's very quick. How deep can it go? Well, look at Great Bear's news release from August 1st, 2019. And let's all review that, because they were the ones that really opened my eyes and said, we're hitting gold where the SGH is telling us that there's some anomaly on surface. Now they're not talking about it anymore. Don't know. I mean, maybe they had some failures, but you know, that's the thing. If you don't try these things, how will you ever know? How will you know where to drill? Then it just becomes just blind luck. Right. We're trying to eliminate that.
Okay. ALX, do you have any JVs left with Denison Mines? I think.
Oh, yes.
The Hook Carter project along Patterson Trend is one of them, I guess.
You know, I had some slides for Hook Carter and I didn't put them in because it's just an inactive project right now. I think they're so busy with Griffin and Phoenix and they've got a lot on their plate. They haven't worked on the property. They haven't drilled since 2019. We have 20%. So yes, we'd like them to work, and we were sort of waiting and hoping and wishing that, you know, something would come out of the first few holes. I think there's been 16 holes drilled starting in 2018 or so. Again, there's alteration, there's graphite, there's all these things, but uranium hasn't been associated with those features yet.
Okay. And I guess last question before we wrap up, Firebird nickel, you know, how quickly do you think Rio Tinto is going to be able to earn into the project? And, you know, probably not necessary now, but were there any thoughts to spin this off into a separate battery materials vehicle?
Well, discovery always makes good things happen. So if we had a discovery at Firebird or a discovery at Electra or both, probably there could be a spin out of like a battery metals company. I've been involved in them before. Pioneer Metals spun out UX. Everybody that was a Pioneer shareholder got a free share of UX back in 2002. So it's a great way to create value if you have something really good. Usually they occur when someone's on the cusp of a discovery and you're pretty sure that it could happen and you're not getting value for it. So you spin out. So, sorry, the Rio Tinto, the question was?
Yeah, how quickly do you think they can earn in?
Oh, very quickly. If they drill in 2022, they'll be at, if they vest, they'll vest at 51%. Because the 3 million was the first benchmark. 3 million for 51%.
Okay.
12 million.
They're going to 80%.
12 million for 80%. So if they decide to come in next year, they will crest the $3 million. There's no question of that.
Perfect. Okay, Warren, well, why don't we wrap it up there? Thank you very much for speaking to us today.
It was my pleasure. I like talking about the company. If anybody has any questions for me, just please email me, call the office. Roger Leschuk will give me the message, and I'm happy to discuss anything about our projects with anyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Warren. Thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. Our webinar series is going to take a little bit of a hiatus for the holidays, but we will be back. Tim Lee will kick us off on January 10th when he sits down with Tempest Resources. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern. Great. Have a great day, everyone, and happy holidays. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks.